On the 10th of July 3018, Saruman reveals his treachery and imprisons Gandalf atop Orthanc. The former leader of the White Council has thrown his lot in with Sauron. But Saruman didn't just wake up one morning and decide to be evil. It was a long process, with many small steps along the way. So in this video, we asked the question, when exactly did Saruman turn evil? And as a follow-up question, why did Gandalf still trust him? The answer to when Saruman turned evil is rather subjective. As any adult knows, morality isn't exactly black and white, and evil and good are better represented as a scale. Although Saruman only revealed himself to be evil in 3018, his actions were undeniably evil before that, and many years before he actually practiced evil, his thoughts, desires, and motivations were also taking a darker turn. But what makes a person evil? Their thoughts, actions, or a combination of both? To understand Saruman completely, we need to take a short look at his history, and I'll try to be brief. Around the year 1000 of the Third Age, Saruman first appears in Middle-earth. At this point, Saruman's intentions seem to be objectively good. He has volunteered to travel to Middle-earth to help guide the Free Peoples in their conflicts against the Rising Shadow. However, there are some early warning signs that show some potential flaws in Saruman's character. He shows very poorly concealed contempt for at least two of his fellow wizards, treating Radagast with disdain and being suspicious and jealous of Gandalf, especially once he learns that Gandalf is in possession of Narya, the Elven Ring of Fire. Now, being a dick doesn't really make one evil. Anyone who has followed my channel knows that I think King Thingol of Doriath was a dick a lot of the time, but it would be a massive stretch to call him evil. However, certain character flaws such as envy definitely can lead someone down that path to evil, so we'll keep an eye on that. He disappears from the history books for almost 1500 years, which he spends travelling in the Eastern lands. We don't really know what he was doing in the East. He returns and takes up residence in Gondor sometime before 2463, merely 3 years after the Watchful Peace ends. This is the year that the White Council is formed, and Saruman is chosen as the leader. But he wasn't exactly the first choice. In particular, Galadriel preferred Gandalf as the leader, but Gandalf refused to take that position. That doesn't exactly endear Gandalf to Saruman any further. There are benefits to having Saruman as the leader though. Of all the members of the White Council, he has studied Sauron the most. Now, this isn't exactly a red flag. After all, if you want to combat your enemy, you must understand them, and to understand them, you must study them. But as we've already established, Saruman can be rather jealous, and through his study of Sauron, and in particular the Rings of Power, Saruman begins to become envious of Sauron. At the moment, he's just flirting with darkness though, and hasn't actually embraced it. We know this because in 2759, Saruman is given possession of Isengard, and in the Unfinished Tales, Tolkien tells us that Saruman's intentions are still good by this point. He accepts Isengard because he recognises its importance to the defence of the West against Sauron's forces, and, just quietly, because he almost certainly knows that there is a Palantir there. But over the next century, this begins to change. Instead of working for the benefit of all the Free Peoples, he begins to almost blatantly work for his own selfish desire for power. A perfect example of this is during the White Council meeting of 2851, where Saruman rejects the idea of driving Sauron out of Dol Guldur because he believes the One Ring will not reveal itself if Sauron is driven away. However, his official response is that the One Ring has likely rolled down to the sea and will never be found, thus an assault on Sauron isn't yet necessary. So by 2851, you could make an argument that Saruman has become evil, at least in heart. He hasn't exactly done anything evil yet, but he is lying and withholding information from his allies, and his motivations are now purely selfish. He further demonstrates this in 2941, when he agrees to an attack on Dol Guldur, but only because he's worried that Sauron might find the One Ring before him. In 2953, the White Council meets for the final time. Afterwards, perhaps spooked by Sauron openly declaring himself in Mordor, Saruman begins to take drastic measures to secure his own power. He isolates himself in Isengard, fortifying it with help from nearby Dunlendings. He attempts to forge his own rings of power, with limited success. Noticing Gandalf's interest in the Shire, he begins to spy on it, increasing his influence in the lands of Eriador. Sometime after 2983, he begins using the Orthanc Stone, the Palantir, despite how dangerous it might be. None of these actions are evil by themselves, but it's a concerning trend, and it leads to his actions in 2990. He begins to breed Orcs. This is when Saruman crosses the line. Orcs are the foot soldiers of the enemy, and even associating with them, let alone breeding them, can easily be considered to be an evil act. By breeding and using Orcs to further his goal, Saruman is basically confirming to himself that he has aligned with evil in one way or another, even if he hasn't allied with Sauron just yet. And Saruman isn't just simply breeding Orcs either. He crosses them with men, creating half-orc or goblin men abominations. Just think about that for 1 second. But not for too long or you'll cry. This is the worst kind of evil, because you're not just using the tools that being evil has provided you, you're actually advancing them. In the year 3000, Saruman's corruption is complete. His use of the Palantir eventually puts him in a confrontation with Sauron, and Sauron quickly dominates his will. Saruman is now no longer a free agent, but has now aligned himself with Sauron. Although Saruman is far from loyal and definitely still undermines Sauron in some ways, especially when it comes to the One Ring, he is absolutely still trying to further Sauron's goal of conquering Middle-earth. Although he would absolutely usurp Sauron's position in a heartbeat, he is still Sauron's military ally, and he proves this by attempting to conquer Rohan during the War of the Ring. So to summarise, Saruman was good for most of the Third Age, although he absolutely could have worked on his personality. Even when he received Isengard in 2759, Saruman still has good intentions, although his studies of Sauron and his works have started leading him down a dangerous path. By 2851, he's well along this pathway, and in his heart, he has already started to betray the Free Peoples by desiring the One Ring for himself. After 2953, he begins to embrace darkness, and his actions start reflecting his thoughts. And by 2990, he is definitely evil, having started to breed and use Orcs for ulterior purposes. In 3000, he secretly joins Sauron, confirming his place as an enemy of the Free Peoples. So when did Saruman turn evil? Well, like I said, that depends on what you believe. If we're talking thoughts and desires, then you could argue that Saruman was evil by 2851 when he started to lie to the White Council. Your counter-argument could be that at this point, Saruman was still opposed to Sauron and was just using an end justifies the means approach. But if thoughts and desires aren't enough to condemn someone's character, then you might argue that Saruman turned evil when he fortified Isengard in 2953, or when he started breeding Orcs in 2990, the latter being especially condemnable. And finally, perhaps if you're someone who always tries to see the good in people, you might argue that Saruman only became evil when Sauron dominated his will, or perhaps even when he finally revealed his treachery to Gandalf. Personally, I think he could have atoned for anything before he started breeding Orcs, and that's probably crossing the line. Alright, so if Saruman is pretty clearly evil well before Gandalf visited him in 3018, then why the hell did Gandalf visit him? How the hell could he trust Saruman? The answer to this is quite simple. No one knew that Saruman had become evil. Sure, Saruman had been acting somewhat suspicious. His reason to not attack Sauron earlier was ridiculous, but he seemingly redeemed that decision by attacking him later. His decision to fortify Isengard and ally with the Dunlendings was met with disapproval from the White Council, but Middle-earth was becoming an increasingly dangerous place, so it's not like fortifying Isengard was unnecessary, and allying with the Dunlendings pissed off the Rohirrim, but it's not like the Dunlendings were evil. Saruman was well within his rights to do these things, and the White Council acknowledged that, even though they questioned his motives. The most heinous of his acts, breeding Orcs, contacting Sauron through the Palantir, spying on the Shire, and using Grima to poison King Theoden of Rohan, were done in great secrecy or with a great deal of plausible deniability, largely aided by his isolationism and caution. When Gandalf receives Saruman's invitation to Isengard, he has no reason to think anything is amiss. Sure, he hasn't seen Saruman in 65 years, but as far as he knows, Saruman's just been chilling in Isengard not really doing anything as he'd done for the last few centuries. In fact, when he arrives at Isengard, everything seems fine at first. Isengard looks the same as it always has. There's no orcs, no forges or pits, no reason to be concerned. Gandalf wasn't the only one to fall for this, Radagast did as well after all. He was the one who delivered Saruman's invitation to Gandalf. And something also has to be said about Gandalf. I'm not suggesting he's naive, but it's well documented that he had a great deal of respect for Saruman. He frequently referred to Saruman as the leader of the Istari, and deferred to his authority. and he valued Saruman's wisdom and knowledge. This is despite the fact that they didn't always see eye to eye, and that Gandalf was quite often suspicious of Saruman's motives. While Gandalf almost certainly guessed that Saruman might desire the One Ring for himself, his reaction to Saruman's betrayal makes it seem like he found it almost inconceivable that Saruman would openly ally himself with Sauron. So there you have it. To summarise, when Saruman embraced evil is up for debate. It could have been at several different dates, depending on how much benefit of the doubt you're willing to give someone, or whether you can firmly separate someone's actions and intentions. As to why Gandalf trusted Saruman, he respected him and considered him a superior, and despite some of his reservations about Saruman, he never imagined Saruman would betray the Free Peoples. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. Fun fact, did you know that despite being the secondary antagonist of The Lord of the Rings, Saruman was invented solely because Tolkien needed a new character to act as Gandalf's captor in Isengard? Funny, you'd think such an important character would need to be properly planned out, but Tolkien invented him on the fly and it worked out amazingly. Cheers, thanks again, and remember, if someone you know starts acting kind of evil, don't do what the White Council did. Ask them if they're okay and if there's something they would like to talk about.